Welcome back to Section 3 of Principles of Sustainable Management, the drivers of change. Welcome to the Anthropocene. When you were born, when I was born, we lived in the geologic era called the Holocene. This was a period of unusual calm and stability. It's the geologic era in which humans developed. We've never known anything else. Until now, we humans are now the dominant geologic force on the planet. We're the first generation to have the capacity to destroy life on the planet, and we may well be the last to be able to save life on the planet. When Royal Dutch Shell does what it calls scenario planning, trying to lay out stories about the future, they look for what they call drivers of change. You can't change these. They are going to drive change throughout the system. Your choice is how you respond to them. And we're facing some fairly formidable ones, from the possibility of total system collapse to staggering inequality. We live in a carbon-constrained world, if not a global climate crisis. We have a volatile energy situation. Water is the petroleum of the next decade. Food, much of the world is already food insecure. And all of this drives, I think, to perhaps the greatest driver, which is the sustainability imperative. We will transform the system and make our world more sustainable. Or, well, failures are fossils. We're in a mess, or as movie star Tommy Lee Jones said, if not, it'll do till the mess arrives. There was a study done recently by some applied mathematicians using a NASA-funded model that looked at collapse throughout human history. And what they found is it's actually fairly common. It happens when one or both of two things obtain. You overrun your resource base, or you have high levels of inequality. Hello. We appear to have both. And the study concluded that under conditions closely reflecting the reality of the world today, we find that collapse will be difficult to avoid. They said this is not inevitable. Collapse can be avoided, but we have to take seriously our responsibility to address these two drivers of change. What do we mean by collapse? Because arguably many parts of the world are in collapse today. What we're talking about here is total system collapse, where hundreds of millions of people the world around, rich, poor, lose what they care most about. It could be property, it could be life, it could be freedom in a democratic society. It can be an economic collapse, an environmental disaster. When these things happen, they tend to last for hundreds to thousands of years, and you won't like it. The UN has said by 2030, the planet's going to need half again as much food as we use today, almost that much more energy, 30% more water. The science is disturbing. Climate change is already making swaths of the earth uninhabitable. Perhaps the entire Mideast and North Africa will be uninhabitable by the 2040s. We are suffering incredible so-called natural disasters, only they're not so natural. They're driven by climate change. We've always had hurricanes. We have not had the superstorms that we are suffering now. And these storms predictably hurt the poorest worst. Pakistan, where 20 million people, 20 million, were displaced in 2010 by flooding. The north of Africa, the Dadaab refugee camp. Climate change tends to drive to failed states, to insurgencies, to conflict of all sorts. And we're seeing this now around the regions that are impacted by climate change. So there are now 65 million refugees on the move. Where are they going to go? What would you do if you could no longer stay where you grew up? You can't grow food. The system is failing around you. Where would you go? The scientists tell us, this is work from Stockholm Resilience Institute, Dr. Johan Rockström, and a number of scientists from around the world, that we are exceeding what are called the planetary boundaries. This is the carrying capacity of the Earth. We're losing fertile topsoil. We're losing groundwater. We're losing fish in the oceans. We're losing life on the planet. And at the same time, we are not even meeting the minimum foundations of supplying people with what they need to have a life of quality and dignity. This is the work of Kate Raworth, whose new book, Donut Economics, argues that we have to be below the planetary boundaries, but above the human minimums to ensure this safe and just operating space for humanity. Sometimes you don't know the value of what we're losing until it's gone. In 1998, there were massive floods in China, $30 billion disaster, more people displaced than there were in the United States because the Chinese had cut the forests at the headwaters of the Yangtze River, forgetting that forests are not just board feet of timber you can extract, but they're watersheds, they're habitat, and they're a place of spiritual renewal. So China was forced into a $12 billion reforestation program. The storms that are hitting us now, Hurricane Harvey will probably be the most expensive storm ever in the history of the United States, well above $150 billion in costs, and millions of people displaced. We don't know exactly what Earth's services are worth, but we sure know that they're not without value. And as Peter Bradford said, it's better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. Treating them as having a value of zero is wrong. The guys at Biosphere 2 in the Arizona desert spent $200 million and couldn't keep 8 people in clean air for 2 years. What's the value of clean air? Whatever it is, we're all a mite sentimental about it. Here are some of the services that intact ecosystems give to us. Again, none of these are counted on any corporate balance sheet, but they underpin the ability of the entire economy to operate. So perhaps arguably they have an infinite value. And we're losing them. We're losing a stable climate. These little guys, the pollinators, are dying. We're not entirely sure why. Now, I suppose you could hand pollinate all of agriculture, but it would certainly be tedious. And the ability of the planet to absorb and detoxify our wastes, what's that worth? A study by True Cost questioned whether any industry is profitable. If you count the loss to the economy, not the spiritual loss, but merely the loss of the services that intact ecosystems provide to businesses today, no business is profitable. We're losing at least $4.7 trillion every year in these ecosystem services, which means that businesses have to pay more to get the equivalent services. I'm not saying that we're running out of stuff. There's a lot of materials, minerals, ore bodies left on Earth, and we're getting ever better at finding them and digging them up. If you will, what we're running out of is the ability of the planet to sustain life. Global Biodiversity Outlook 3. We're losing life now at a faster rate than we did when the dinosaurs went extinct. Coral reefs are dying. Sorry, scuba divers. Business as usual. There may be no living coral reefs on Earth by as early as 2030. The Amazon is drying up and burning. This is the Earth's lungs. And we are acidifying the oceans. This is, among other things, killing the little phytoplankton that produce much of the oxygen we breathe. Now, some people say it's over. We have left it until too late. Dr. Peter Turchin at the University of Connecticut says that our system will collapse within 10 years. The Dark Mountain Project says even more soberingly, get over it. Grieve, and then get over it, because it is too late. And you can Google, don't do this, it'll put you in a very bad mood, but you can Google near-term human extinction and find people that say humans go extinct within the near future. Really? Are you okay with that? I'm not. I think it is urgent that we look for ways to avoid this collapse. You're the result of 4 billion years of evolutionary success. Act like it. What will it take to avoid collapse? We know a lot of these key requirements, that we live within the planetary boundaries, that we enable all people to have lives of dignity, and that we create sufficient equity, that we retain the social stability that we are now starting to lose. Equity. This was the number from 2015. 85 people have as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion poorest people on the planet. That's half the population. That number is now out of date. Here's the new number. 8 men have as much wealth as half the population. It's not that we don't have money to fix the problems. If you simply took the bonuses, not the salaries, just the bonuses paid to Wall Street bankers in 2014 and spread it across all people making a minimum wage, it would double the minimum wage to a living wage. There's plenty of money. And time is short. Climate change is perhaps the most serious problem facing us. This is a vision on the left of what if we acted now. Even as late as we've left it, if we acted now and we went at it with all the technologies that we know, where might we get to? It's still going to warm up, but on the right is clearly hell on earth. And we have a lot of work to do. Business as usual, we're looking at 4 degrees C increase in average temperatures. That's probably not survivable by life as we know it. If you take the pledges made as part of the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change that Christiana Figueres ran, that gets us to 3 degrees C, still way too high. If you look at the various targets that other people have set, you ratchet it down a bit. The scientists are now saying we can only warm a degree or so above pre-industrial levels. We've already warmed more than a degree. which is why you're seeing the kinds of monster storms and dust storms and droughts and crop failures and all of the indicators of climate change. Hurricane Harvey is what climate change looks like. The 2014 drought in California, enormous economic cost. The then Secretary of Energy said the nation's salad bowl could become a dust bowl, and I'm not sure how the cities are going to get along. These are some projections by Architecture 2030 of the kind of sea level rise under climate change. San Francisco, the financial district, will be underwater. Tampa, which is one of the more flood-prone regions, massive economic loss. New York City already had one brush with a hurricane. By 2030, simply from sea level rise, never mind the storm surge, just the sea level rise, you lose vast tracts of low-lying New Jersey and Manhattan. Estimated exposure at least $1 trillion, and perhaps more. I don't care whether you believe in climate change. The Earth doesn't care whether you believe in climate change. This is science. This is simply the facts as the scientists are laying them out. In the 80s, we suffered about $1 billion storm a year. In the 90s, two of these things. In the aughts, $5 billion storms each year. It's now off the charts. This, of course, is endangering the insurance industry, much of the real estate industry. We now know that about 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions were caused by 90 companies. 90 companies. Yes, each one of us, when we get in our car, when we fly on an airplane, we are contributing. But if we simply tackled these 90 companies, the fossil fuel companies primarily, we would go a long way toward solving the climate crisis. As Christiana Figueres says, where capital goes over the next 15 years is going to decide whether we survive. But that in itself causes a problem. If the money leaves these industries, as it is already starting to do, you are going to have enormous stranded assets. If we do not burn the carbon that is in the ground, the coal, the oil, the natural gas, that is on the balance sheets of many companies and indeed many nations counting, you're looking at over $20 trillion in stranded assets. In comparison, the 2008 mortgage collapse happened because of $2.7 trillion in stranded assets. And we have no idea how to cope with this, except to begin to get about it soon. The sooner we begin to make this transition, the sooner we transition these industries into productive businesses, the easier it will be on us all. The futurist William Gibson said the future's already here, it's just not widely distributed. We have all the technologies we need to solve all of the problems facing us. So let's get about it. In the first industrial revolution, the new machines that came in increased human labor productivity 100-fold, from hand sewing, knitting, weaving, to machines that made fabrics, machines that made everything. At that time in our history, skilled workers were relatively scarce. There was lots of nature. And so profit-maximizing capitalists economized on their scarce resources. They taxed the use of people and they subsidize the use of nature. And so we have income taxes, employment taxes. Most of government revenue is raised by taxing the stuff we want more of. And we live at a time when 10,000 more people arrive on Earth every hour. We're not short of people, and we're losing every major ecosystem. So the logic of capitalism should hold. Economize on your scarce resource. What's changed is what's scarce. So we ought to be implementing these principles by time. Push off these scary consequences by using all resources dramatically more efficiently, more productively. Then redesign how we make and deliver everything, and then manage all institutions to be regenerative of human and natural capital, the two forms of capital that we're short of. This approach, called natural capitalism, is, we think, the profitable way to solve the challenges facing us. And if we implement it, we will enhance the productivity with which we use all resources fourfold. We already know how to do that. We wrote a book a few years back called Factor 4, showing how doing this is profitable. Throughout Europe, they are implementing Factor 10. Ultimately, we will enhance resource productivity 100-fold, as we did in the first industrial revolution. Countries have declared Factor 4 national goals. Organizations are calling for Factor 10 to 20. This is just better business, because at present we are incredibly wasteful. The amount of stuff that our economy digs up and puts through various resource crunching activities and then throws away amounts to 20 times your and my body weight for every American every day. Globally, this is 500 billion tons of stuff wasted. Or put it another way, of all the stuff that we dig up and put into the economy, less than 1% of it is still there 6 months after sale. All the rest is waste. This is an enormous business opportunity. Squeezing waste out of our system is the most profitable way to begin the transition to a sustainable world. We know how to do this in all aspects of our economy. And we've done it before. When oil prices shot up in '79, we cut oil consumption 15% over 6 years and grew the economy 16%. We are still incredibly wasteful of energy. The amount of waste energy at power plants, about the same as the entire country of Japan uses. Why? Well, let's look at an industrial pumping loop, and you'll get a sense of why we do things in dumb ways and how we deal with it. A friend of ours was putting together a plant in China. He had optimized it using the best West German engineering firms, supposedly, to use 95 horsepower until he had what has been called a sudden cessation of stupidity. He had a better idea, figured how to do it with 7 horsepower, 92% saving. The resulting factory cost less, worked better. What did he do? This is a design change. It's in his head. First of all, he made the pipes really big, because then he could make the pumps smaller. Normally, engineers will tell you that you don't increase the size of the pipe beyond the energy saving of pushing the fluid through the pipe, forgetting that if you make the pipes really big, the really smaller pumps are much cheaper. Then he laid the pipes out first so they could be short and straight, and then plunked down the equipment that the pipes were going to connect, not the other way around. In most factories, you plunk the equipment down, then call in the pipe fitters, and then you get a snarl. He optimized the whole system, not the pieces of it. If we did this kind of system optimization, we could easily save half of all motor electricity, that's 3/4 of all industrial electricity, with returns on investment vastly more attractive than your stock market portfolio. We know how to make, for example, chemical plants with the output of the plant in India that went boom and killed a lot of people at Bhopal, the size of a watermelon, using advanced designs, better materials productivity throughout every industry, can deliver services better and cost a lot less. Southwire Corporation figured how to cut the energy it used per pound of product in half. That equaled the company's profitability. They saved 4,000 jobs at 10 plants in 6 states. Diversey found that for every dollar they invested in climate protection, they got $2 back, with savings of well over 150%. My team walked into a big warehouse that had a big company that had computers and monitors left on 24/7 because of some urban myths. It shortens the life of the computer to turn it off and on. No. IT needs it left on 24/7. No. In this company, just publishing a policy, turn the darn thing off if you're not sitting in front of it, would save the company $700,000 a year. Throughout our economy, we waste at least almost $3 billion a year running computers with nobody sitting in front of them. And computer electricity costs are a big chunk of running modern office buildings. Ford Motor Company figured this out, published such a policy, saved themselves $1 million. You can do it at home. Well, it's beer money. Walked into a big warehouse, 7 million square foot distribution center, 500-watt light bulbs shining down on the tops of boxes. Guys below had task lighting so they could see where they were going. Said, y'all have a switch? Just turning off the unneeded lights would save the company $650,000 a year. Dow, Louisiana, a man named Ken Nelson figured, well, we can save energy on the shop floor, and the people who best know how to do that are the workers. So he had a little contest. Figure out how to save energy. I'll give you a little reward. They achieved over $110 million in annual savings over the 12-year run that Ken was at this facility. Returns on investment over 200% and rising as the workers got cleverer at figuring out ways to cut costs. DuPont, back in the 90s, made a commitment to cut their emissions of greenhouse gases 65% below their 1990 levels by 2010, as they were raising revenues and getting energy from renewables. They did it. Enormous savings, $3 billion from 2000 to 2005, with dramatically increased stock value, because with the lower costs, more money could go to the bottom line. My friend Andrew Winston points out that for a couple of these years, their annual savings, $2.2 billion a year, that was the same as their profitability. Here's a company that's profitable because it has made a commitment to climate protection. Little company out in California, Mi Rancho Tortillas, they make tortillas. And they wanted to sell to Walmart. And so they said, what do we have to do to sell to Walmart? And we said, Walmart cares about whether or not you are saving energy resources, material resources, cutting your carbon footprint. Let's look around. The first thing we found was they could fix their lights. And doing this cost them $14,000. It was saving them $32,000 every year. Count all the waste reductions, $450,000. You can do this in little companies too. Ripe Graphics, computer graphics company, had a lot of big computer monitors that they thought they turned off when they went home, but many of these things have what's called phantom load. Your television does this to you at home. It says it's off, but it's still drawing a little load. So they plugged it all into a power strip. When they leave for the day, they click the power strip off. Now it's really off. Cut their electric bills from $220 a month to $90. ST Microelectronics pledged to be carbon neutral by 2010 with a 40-fold increase in productivity. When they set about doing this, they had no earthly idea how to do it. Figuring it out drove their corporate innovation, took them from the number 12 chip maker in the world to the number 6, saved them a lot of money, and won them a lot of awards. Company after company after company cut your waste of energy, increase your savings, and be part of the solution to climate change. Carbon Disclosure Project found that companies that build this into their corporate strategy have 18% higher return on investment, 67% higher than companies that don't even measure or manage their carbon footprint. It should not surprise us that American businesses take twice as much energy to produce their goods and services as do our European and Asian competitors, which had been members of the Kyoto Protocol and remain committed now to the Paris Accord. Germany is a great example. Greenhouse gas emissions down, economy up. Where do you start? Good places, buildings. We all spend a lot of time in buildings. They are responsible for a lot of waste. Some smaller communities, buildings may be 90% of your carbon footprint. And indoor air quality can be worse than the outdoor air quality. And yet we know how to take any existing building, make it 3 to 4-fold more efficient, new buildings 10 times as efficient or more. We can make buildings that require no external energy to keep them comfortable year-round, to provide for lighting and all of the services within it. This is the Adam Lewis building at Oberlin. The students helped to design it. It is entirely powered by the sun, and it's a brilliant building to be inside. Now the standards are going even beyond to what's called the Living Building Challenge. Such buildings have to use materials from within 100 miles of where they're constructed, collect all their own water, provide all of their own energy. They are delightful buildings to be inside of. This is the new building at the Omega Center in upstate New York. You can do it in a big office building, 4 Times Square in New York City. Costs the same to build as a normal building, uses half the energy, gets a lot of its energy from solar cells in what are called the spandrels. This is the chunk between the windows. In the 2003 Northeast blackout, this was the only building around with light. People came from blocks around to camp out underneath it. This is genuine homeland security. Harvard again. Owners of ordinary buildings are reviewing their portfolios to green them so that they avoid obsolescence to meet market demand. You can do it on retrofit. Remax office building in Florida used some rocket science. They hauled out a caulk gun, saving themselves about $8,000 a year. Again, the return on investment of these kinds of measures is dramatically higher than your bank account. It also drives increases in productivity and health. Pacific Gas and Electric found that if you put good daylighting into schools, you get higher test scores. Walmart found if you put daylighting into their big box stores, you get higher sales. Boeing did a lighting retrofit, which, among other things, reduced their error rate by 30%. This is very good news for those of us who fly around on airplanes. Providing better air quality, better lighting, dramatically increases worker productivity, worker health, and thus U.S. productivity. Implementing good green building practices could save U.S. businesses about $200 billion by increasing worker productivity, $58 billion by avoiding absenteeism. What you pay for people is dramatically higher than what you pay for energy. So building managers say, I don't care about my energy bill, it's not that big. Yes, but what you do with your energy is what enables your people to be so productive. Think about New York City or any big city that has a lot of buildings. What if we committed to cut the carbon emissions of those buildings through good green design? It would create a lot of jobs, create a lot of money, go a long ways towards cutting our carbon footprint. There are no technological or economic barriers to this kind of energy efficiency and then powering our entire economy with renewable power. Dr. Mark Jacobson at Stanford has studied 138 countries, showing that in every instance, by say 2030, they could be entirely powered by renewable energy. Tony Seba, Stanford professor, says not only can they will be. Inevitably, he says, because of the convergence of business models and changes in technology. Business models, no money down solar that Jiggershaw invented, or transportation as a service. Technologies, the fall in the cost of solar in batteries is falling. We now have electric cars. We will very soon have driverless cars. Put all of these things together, and you will cut the cost of moving us around 10 times, tenfold reduction in cost for transit. Anytime you have had a tenfold drop in the cost driven by this convergence of business models and technologies, you have a disruption. And Tony says we are looking at the mother of all disruptions coming at us. If he is correct, by 2030, we will be looking at the end of the oil, gas, coal, uranium, nuclear, utility, auto industries, and the banks that hold the paper in them. That's a big disruption. Here's what's happening with the price of solar. Most of the world is now at what's called grid parity. The cost of putting solar on your roof is about the same as the cost to deliver power to you from central power stations and wires. The National Bank of Abu Dhabi said with no technical breakthroughs, cost of solar is going to keep coming down. This can happen very quickly. California went from 1.9% of its electricity from solar to 5% in 1 year. And these numbers are already out of date. We already have unsubsidized solar farms and wind farms being bid at 2 cents a kilowatt hour. That's getting competitive with the price of electric efficiency and way beats the cost even of running natural gas plants. Then look at some other of these convergences of business models and technologies. Little Tesla. How many cars does Tesla sell? Way fewer than General Motors. And Tesla is, a few months back, Tesla was valued at more than General Motors. What business is Tesla in? Are they really a car company? Arguably, they're a battery company. When you put the electric cars together with the batteries and then Solar City, which Elon Musk went out and bought, you now have an integrated energy company providing solar on your roof, providing your mobility, storing that energy. If you hook those systems up so that any of us who drive an electric car, I mean, myself, I drive a Leaf, I can't afford a Tesla, but if my Leaf running off the solar panels that I have at my ranch, the batteries that I have in my garage, interfacing with all of the rest of the grid, you've just displaced the need for all centralized power plants, for oil in cars. And this stuff is happening incredibly rapidly. Batteries. Southern California Edison had a blowout at one of its gas wells, which it used to store natural gas, leading to fears of blackouts, brownouts because of power shortages. Elon said, no worries, we'll put in batteries. And in about 6 months' time, they put in 70 megawatts of batteries. This is faster than you can build any power plant anywhere. Elon's now going on to South Australia, where they had a catastrophic grid failure, putting in 100 megawatts of standalone batteries hooked to the renewable energy system. We're in the midst of a profound transformation in the way that we deliver the energy services that we want. Google and the self-driving car. Now, Apple is starting to drive its employees around in self-driving cars. Imagine, why would you pay to buy a car, insure the car, put gasoline in it, pay to maintain it, pay to park it, if all you do is get on your smartphone, dial up Lyft, and here comes a driverless car, takes you where you're going, drops you off, goes get somebody else? You could reduce by 6-fold, 10-fold the amount of road space we need. You'd dramatically reduce the amount of accidents, almost all of which are caused by human error. And you would drop the cost 10-fold of moving yourself around. Apple's little ferry. Google, solar on their parking lots. Pull down charging for in this case, these are hybrid electrics. Volvo, by the way, has said by 2019, they're not going to make any gasoline-fueled cars. They're all going to be electric or hybrid. And in this case, you can interconnect with the grid. And when your car is parked, if the grid needs power, it draws from your battery. The solar panels are charging your battery. The batteries in cars are 15 times the capacity of central power stations today. Imagine. We can transform the entire system. Google called this RE less than C, renewable energy less than coal. And when General Electric heard that Google was doing this, they wrote me, they said, we've done it. Our wind turbines cost less than coal. And then they're going to go to work on solar. Now, as you might imagine, unless they get on top of this, this is a real problem for the electric utilities. E.ON and RWE, the two big utilities in Europe, have been losing money. The top 20 European utilities lost $600 billion in value over the past 5 years. RWE lost 60% profitability, E.ON 91%. They may be gone. So they said, we got it. We're going to get rid of our nuclear and fossil facilities. We're going to be distributed renewables utilities. We will take power from all of the distributed solar and wind systems, send it out to where people need it. We will be the intermediary. But imagine this, suppose blockchain, this concept whereby information resides on computers everywhere, so it's essentially impossible to cheat the system. I have a solar panel, you have an electric car, you need some of mine, we do a transaction over blockchain. Do we need the utilities? These are the questions now that smart utilities are beginning to ask themselves. I think there is use to having a grid. We built the darn thing. We might as well continue to derive value from it. But what we need is for the utilities to get smart about it. Because here's what the corporates are doing. They're committing to go 100% renewably powered. It's over. The age of fossil fuels is over. The question now is, what kind of a world do we want to build? In Paris in 2015, we achieved an essentially universal global commitment to begin dealing with the climate crisis. Our challenge now is to set forth a vision for the world that we want to have and then set about building it. We think we're here because of this big brain of ours. No, we're not. We're here because of 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. And yet the way in which we're producing food is destroying that soil and endangering civilization. The world around, we are at risk of famine. And as I speak, 20 million people in Africa are at risk of famine. Because of drought, because of war, because of failed states. Remember, it was a food riot in Tunisia that kicked off the Arab Spring. In 2010, when the incredible heat waves across Europe destroyed the Russian wheat crop, and the drought in Australia destroyed much of the rice crop, and food prices soared. This kicked off enormous turmoil throughout the Middle East. More than 33 countries the world around face this kind of social unrest because of rising food prices, because of global warming. So countries like China are buying up land in the United States, in Africa, so that they can grow food for their people. Companies are buying farmland in fear of food shortages. Who would you prefer to get your food from? The way we produce food now is incredibly energy intensive. We used to get more than 2 calories of food for every calorie of energy that we put into it. It now takes 10 calories of fossil energy to produce 1 calorie of food. Modern agriculture is very water intensive, and it is very polluting of the water that it uses. And yet we know how to do it differently. We know how to do sustainable agriculture in ways that build up the soil, that use far fewer inputs, whether they be chemicals or fuel or poisons. But we can't possibly do that and feed the world, can we? Well, as a matter of fact, we can't feed the world any other way. In 2013, UNCTAD showed that the only way we can feed the world is with smallholder organic agriculture. This is what feeds 70% to 80% of the world now. And the notion of converting that at high cost, high energy use, high chemical fertilizer use to industrial agriculture simply is not affordable. Smallholders produce most of the food in Africa, and by shifting to the best technologies of agroecology, we can dramatically increase crop yields. This approach to agriculture also creates jobs, and we need jobs in today's world. Perhaps more important, agroecology, holistic management, organic agriculture can begin to roll climate change backward. Soil, The world's grasslands are the second largest carbon sink in the world after the oceans. If we can increase soil carbon just 2% per year, it would soak up all of the human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, just 2%. And so at the Paris Climate Accord, the French government proposed a 4% accord of going beyond just soaking up existing emissions and beginning to roll climate change backward. Savory Institute, created by Alan Savory, is showing how to regenerate the world's grasslands. Alan has a brilliant TED Talk in which he walks through how this works. Basically, it is mimicking how grazing animals co-evolved with grasslands throughout prehistory, dense packed, because they're predators around the outside. If you're a buffalo and there's a wolf, the safe place to be is in the middle of the herds. Everybody's trying to get into the middle of the herd. They eat everything, their hooves chop it up, they fertilize it, and then they move on. This is what gave us the world's grasslands. And even on degraded Western range, you can double the carrying capacity of grazing animals at the same time that you're increasing soil health, at the same time that you're bringing back water table, bringing back biodiversity. How? Carbon in the soil is fixed by roots. And when you have animal impact, that feeds the biological community, the fungi, the microbes in the soil that fix the carbon that the roots are sloughing and keeping carbon in the ground. If you don't have the animals, the ground is losing carbon. I got in a fight with George Monbiot, who writes for The Guardian, who wrote an article about why this is all rubbish, we all have to become vegetarians. And I pointed out that I have managed ground, 1,000 acres of ground, that was given to a foundation that thought that cows were evil, and so they pulled the cows off. And over 20 years, the ground degraded. Well, we put the cows back and began to counter the noxious weeds. You can see there how the grass is all thatched. New grass can hardly grow up. The weeds can punch through. Bring the cows in, eat all that stuff, and now the grass can grow. And what you see there in the bottom is a little herd of cattle, dense packed by electric fence. We're mimicking how the predators used to work with animals to restore the grasslands. Here's what the electric fence does. Cows eat it down, you move the fence, cows jump in. And here's what you get. On the right is conventionally managed rangeland in South Africa. On the left is what's called holistic management, what Alan preaches. And an example after example after example. You can stand at a fence line and look one way and see conventional, look the other way and see holistic. This is how it works over time, where you had bare, denuded ground, you bring the cattle in, and you begin to get grass and annuals, then you get the cover, then you get the perennials. Over time, the land begins to heal, but it can't do this without the animals that it co-evolved with. You can use this to rehabilitate damaged land, turn cows out, feed them. And with essentially no rain, you get grass. Or rehabilitate acid mine tailings. In the bottom picture on the left is where they practiced holistic management. On the right is where they had been doing hydroseeding, artificially trying to bring cover back on the mine tailings, and failed. Patagonia is now partnering with the Land Institute to grow kernza. This is a perennial wheat with very deep roots. You can see the kernza on the left with its deep roots, ordinary wheat on the right with very shallow roots. So Patagonia is making beer called long root ale to celebrate this way of returning the grasslands to productivity and to what's called biosequestration, the ability of ground to hold carbon, to take carbon out of the air and hold it there. The Rodale Institute has shown how you can do this with compost-based organic agriculture. And again, begin to take carbon out of the air, put it into the soil. Marin Carbon Project is doing this with dairy manure mixed with green compost that they are spreading on ground. They're finding they can get a ton of carbon per hectare, that's about 2 acres per year. At a ton per acre or more, spread across the world's grasslands, over 30 years, we would get back to about 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is about the pre-industrial level of carbon concentration in the atmosphere, of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We're rolling climate change backward. We want to get back to 280 parts per million. Now, Bill McKibben's number of 350, that's the maximum that we ought to be at. And we're already at about 408 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, where we're way above the safe level. We need to be moving back towards safety. And if you want to try this at home, here are the statistics of how you do these calculations. You can take a look at a piece of ground, measure the carbon in it, measure the increase year on year. This is what Savory is now doing with an approach they call ecological outcome verification, where ranchers will be able to measure the increase in carbon year on year. And this is the measure of whether or not you are doing regenerative agriculture. Meet Gabe Brown, who's doing this. Gabe was going broke trying to do commodity corn, soybeans. So he shifted. He now runs a variety of animals on his ground, grows oats and corn and soybeans, and is doing very well. On some of his acreage, he had, when he first bought the place, had 1.3% organic matter. On some of his plots, he now has over 11% organic matter. You can increase soil health very quickly. Joel Salatin at Polyface Farm. This is the operation that Michael Pollan wrote about in Omnivore's Dilemma. He raises a variety of animals and vegetables, has restored what had been a burnt out old farm in Virginia. It's now one of the most productive farms in the country. He has what he calls salad bar beef and pigorators. He does holistic management of his beef, where he uses electric fence to move them. And then when he's moved the cows off, he turns the pigs loose. The pigs root up the ground and help sequester more carbon. These are his cows waiting to move next door into the salad bar. Joel also writes some very funny books. This is what he calls a chicken tractor. The chickens are pasture raised, but they're protected. These chicken tractors can be pulled along slowly so the chickens can move with them. This is a different sort of operation, pasture raising chickens. And this is moving the chicken tractors across the land. Now, the chicken tractors break up all the manure that was left by the cows, by the pigs, further sequestering the carbon in the ground. Will Harris, White Oak Pastures in South Georgia, took a failing ranch and turned it profitable using holistic management. He has 137 employees. His neighbor, who does commodity peanut farming, has 3. So again, much more labor intensive. And Will is restoring Bluffton, a little village in Georgia that had been dying and being eaten by kudzu. You can go there now, shop at the general store, eat supper at Will's ranch, stay in his agro-tourism cabins. He has decommoditized, deindustrialized, and decentralized, and is producing extremely high quality, tasty food in ways that are healthy for the land, for the animals, for the people who eat it. But he found a little problem. He pasture raises his chickens. And when he first started doing this, very rarely they would see a bald eagle, endangered species. White Oak Pastures now has 80 families of bald eagles that winter there because they're feasting on his chickens. Will said, well, I can't shoot them. I guess I'm supposed to tithe to the church. I guess I'm tithing to nature. But the ultimate solution is to have everybody doing this, everybody pasture raising their chickens. And yeah, you'll lose a few to the eagles, but we'll have a much healthier ecosystem. So Will makes up for it by having tourists come to see the eagles and stay in his cabins. You can also do this sort of operation in developing countries. This is a coffee plantation ecotourist facility that also is getting carbon credits for the extent to which it's putting carbon back in the soil. This kind of produce is what people want. Grass-fed beef, grass milk, grass butter, pasture-raised eggs from healthy chickens is much better for you than industrial agriculture. This pink slime is the name that was given to the way the industrial agriculture was scraping the waste up off the floor, irradiating it so it looked nice and pink, and then selling it to you. Wouldn't you rather know where your food is coming from? Well, a lot of people do, and that's why locally sourced, sustainably grown products are topping the menu trends year on year on year. Again, it's what people want. And transforming our food system is another enormous savings of energy. Energy can be as much as 95% of a restaurant's environmental impact. They are one of the biggest electricity consumers in the retail sector, using 2.5 times the energy of other commercial buildings, and wasting a tremendous amount of food. 1.3 billion tons of food, a third of all that is produced, gets wasted every year, even in poor countries. And eliminating that waste, just 25% of that waste, eliminating a quarter of that waste would free up enough food to feed everybody on Earth. There is no way. What happens to the food you don't eat on your plate, the imperfect tomatoes in the supermarket? When it gets thrown away into a landfill, it sits there and rots and creates methane. Restaurants produce a lot of trash, plastic trash, food trash. Almost all of that could be recycled, could be composted, could be fed into a waste to energy facility. There's a brilliant little company called SEAB, capital S, capital E, small a, capital B. They bring container-sized units to your restaurant, to your apartment building, throughout town to a grocery store, and produce gas by digesting the organic waste. And then the gas feeds right into your building. Or you can simply compost it. I have one of these compost bins on my ranch. The compost goes right into my garden. Much better way of dealing with waste than throwing it out. What if we transformed our cities to be living cities, to grow much of our food in cities, on rooftops, in vertical farming? It's being done. This is Gotham Greens in New York, Brooklyn Grange, rooftop gardening right in New York City. Doing things locally dramatically increases the health of your economy. When you buy at a locally owned independent store, you're recirculating the dollars within the community. It's called the economic multiplier. Keynes first pointed this out. For every dollar spent at a local business, something like 45% gets reinvested locally. For every dollar spent in a chain, only 15 cents of it stays locally. You're leaking money out of your community when you're not buying local. And a little bit can go a long way towards increasing the economic prosperity of a community. When you buy locally, you drive this vitality, you increase diversity, you increase equity, you cut dependence on oil, you create jobs and a healthy economy, you give economic stability to the community. You tend to get better service at a local restaurant, and you empower the community into becoming an economy in service to life, the kind of community where we all want to live. Here are some statistics of what it costs to do your shopping at a big box chain and the advantage to your community of shopping locally. If we simply shifted 20% of food dollars in the county around Seattle, it would increase 500 million in local income in King County. What you do with your dollar, where you shop, what you buy, can make a big difference. And counter things like loss of farmland, loss of local capacity. Michael Schumann, one of the best thinkers in the new economy, has written a lot about this. His book, Local Economy Solution, outlines how what he calls pollinator businesses. These are businesses that help pollinate the economic success of a local community, are key to authentic economic development. Who cares? We're all pretty comfortable, aren't we? When you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and remember those numbers from the beginning of this segment about the possibility of total system collapse. When you stand at the edge of a cliff, the only smart thing to do is turn around. And when you do, you see all of the goodness of the life we have left behind us, of what we can build in human community. You've heard this phrase, yeah, don't take a risk. The second mouse gets the cheese. Come on, folk. Let's slap on a helmet and go for it. We have all the technologies we need. We know how to do this. It just takes our commitment. And best case, it takes good government policy. It's a little like a bad light bulb joke. How many economists does it take to screw in a light bulb? None, the free market will do it. No. We all know somebody has to climb a ladder and put the darn bulb in, hopefully an LED bulb. Markets make a marvelous servant. They're a lousy religion. There's a very important role for communities of faith and for wrestling with the questions of why are we here? Because markets were always designed to allocate scarce resources efficiently in the short term. Markets were never intended to take care of grandchildren. That's our job. That's the job of a free people coming together in a democracy and saying, what kind of a world do we want to leave to our children? What kind of a world do we want to live in here today? And then insisting on that. Yeah, leadership. We had a president that we thought pretty highly of. He brought us the healthcare plan, the Paris Accord. Mr. Obama was no saint. This was the poster in the Copenhagen airport. In 2012, we could have sealed the deal. We could have had a global climate agreement. And the governments of the world didn't agree. And we wasted 3 years, 3 critical years. Martin King said, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We're confronted by the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there's such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is the thief of time and leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. It is very late. We're running out of time to use the technologies to solve the problems facing us. We've learned to walk on the moon, though even on the moon we needed a car. We have not yet learned to walk on Earth. We're starting. In 2015, we did it. We sealed the deal. Was it enough? No. But it was a very good start. Only 2 countries opted out, Syria and Nicaragua. Now the United States claims that it's going to. Does it matter? Yes, it does. We ought to be a leader of the world. We ought to be setting the way. But in some ways, no, it doesn't. The world also agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. All the nations of the world agreed to this. And if we implement these goals, we will create a sustainable world. Every company can look at one or more of these goals and help find its purpose in helping to meet these goals. And meanwhile, even if the US pulls out of Paris, businesses, cities, states are saying, we're still in. We are going to abide by the Paris Accords. We're going to ensure that the US meets its commitment under Paris, regardless of what the child-in-chief decides to do. Leadership, yes, it would be nice. But remember, in the book Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, the White Wizard, said, the rule of no realm is mine, but all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care, and for my part I shall not wholly fail, if anything passes through this night that can still grow fair and bear fruit and flower again in the days to come. For I too am a steward, did you not know? The rule of no realm is mine. And remember, it was these 2, the fun-loving, unassuming little hobbits, who took on their shoulders this awesome task. And they were scared. They didn't know where they were going. But in the end, all the kings and warriors and wizards could just stand by as the little people saved the world. I think real leadership is extraordinary courage by ordinary people. We can do this. We know what to do. We know how to do it. The question is, will we?